Welcome to Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. September 7th, 1940. As dusk settles over London, a new sound fills the air, a sound that will become the city's grim soundtrack for the next 8 months. It is the drone of hundreds of Luftwaffe bombers, a mechanical hum that grows from a distant whisper to an earth-shaking roar. This is the beginning of the Blitz, the campaign of strategic bombing designed to break the will of the British people. For 57 consecutive nights, and then intermittently until May 1941, the German Air Force unloads a storm of high explosives and incendiaries upon the sprawling metropolis. The city becomes a panorama of destruction. Searchlights carve frantic patterns across a sky filled with the dark shapes of Heinkel He 111s and Dornier 17s. The sharp crack of anti-aircraft guns is a constant, desperate reply, punctuating the deafening crump of exploding bombs. Entire city blocks vanish in fire and smoke. Landmarks that have stood for centuries are reduced to rubble. The docks, the industrial heart of the empire, burn with an infernal glow visible for miles. But amidst this reign of terror, a new and insidious threat emerges from the wreckage. For every bomb that detonates, another lies silent, buried deep in the London clay. These are the unexploded bombs, the UXBs. Initially dismissed as duds, they are soon revealed to be a far more complex weapon. Many are fitted with delayed action fuses, designed to detonate hours or even days after impact. Their purpose is psychological and strategic: to sow chaos, paralyze infrastructure, and turn the simple act of survival into a game of chance. A single UXB could shut down a vital railway line, halt production at a munitions factory, or force the evacuation of thousands from their homes. London is not just under attack. It is being systematically seeded with hidden time bombs, transforming the city into a deadly minefield. A new kind of war has begun, not on a distant battlefield, but in the back gardens, cratered streets, and shattered buildings of London itself. And it would require a new kind of soldier to fight it. The problem of the UXB was unlike anything the British military had prepared for. This was not a conventional threat that could be met with rifles and bayonets. It was a technical and psychological challenge of the highest order. The German Luftwaffe was not just dropping bombs. It was waging a campaign of sustained disruption. With an estimated 10% of bombs failing to detonate on impact, London quickly became riddled with these sleeping monsters. The city's vital arteries began to clog. A bomb buried near a major train station like Victoria or Waterloo could sever supply lines and prevent the movement of troops and materials. One that landed near a power station could plunge entire districts into darkness, compounding the terror of the nightly blackout. The psychological impact was immense. A red flag and a cordon would go up around a suspected UXB site, forcing families from their homes and workers from their factories. The waiting was an agony of suspense. Would it go off now? In an hour? Tomorrow? This constant, underlying tension frayed nerves already stretched thin by the nightly raids. The German engineers were sophisticated and cruel in their designs. They introduced a variety of fusing mechanisms intended to thwart any attempt at disposal. There were simple clockwork timers, ticking down to a preset detonation time. More advanced were the electrical fuses, often with anti-withdrawal mechanisms that would trigger the bomb if the fuse was tampered with. Most feared of all were the booby traps, secondary devices like the ZUS-40 anti-handling fuse, designed specifically to kill the men trying to render the bomb safe. It turned every disposal attempt into a lethal puzzle. The British government realized this was a crisis that could cripple the war effort and shatter civilian morale. The initial response was chaotic, with air raid precautions, wardens, and local police trying to manage a threat far beyond their capabilities. A specialized force was needed, one with the engineering skill to understand the mechanisms and the cold courage to face them. The call went out to the British Army's Corps of Royal Engineers. These men, known as sappers, were the Army's builders, demolition experts, and combat engineers. Now, they were tasked with the most delicate and dangerous demolition job imaginable, taking the bomb apart piece by piece while it was still very much alive. The first bomb disposal sections of the Royal Engineers were formed in haste, a desperate measure to counter a rapidly escalating threat. The men drafted into these units were not volunteers for a suicide mission. They were simply soldiers following orders. Their training was rudimentary at best, often consisting of a few days of lectures on captured German bomb fuses. Their equipment was laughably inadequate for the task at hand. They went into the field with little more than standard mechanics tools, wrenches, spanners, hammers, and stethoscopes to listen for the dreaded ticking of a clockwork fuse. The early days were a brutal process of trial and error, with error being instantly fatal. The learning curve was vertical, and it was paid for in blood. The mortality rate was staggering. Some of the first bomb disposal companies lost half their men in the opening months of the Blitz. These sappers were operating under conditions that defy imagination. They worked grueling 18-hour shifts, often while air raids were still in progress. The nights were a hellscape of blackout darkness, punctuated by the flash of explosions and the sweeping beams of searchlights. The city burned around them, the air thick with smoke and the smell of destruction. Their workplace was a muddy, waterlogged bomb crater, its sides threatening to collapse at any moment. They had to be lowered into these pits, sometimes dozens of feet deep, to work in claustrophobic confinement with thousands of pounds of high explosive. Every sense was on high alert. They learned to identify the hiss of an active chemical fuse, to feel for the faint vibration of a clockwork mechanism, and to recognize the subtle click that signaled a booby trap had been armed. They were engaged in an intimate, high-stakes duel with an unseen German engineer who had designed the device to kill them. The courage required was of a unique kind. It was not the heat-of battle bravery of a soldier charging an enemy position. It was a cold, calculated courage, a methodical calm in the face of imminent, violent death. They had to suppress the most basic human instinct for survival, forcing their hands to remain steady as they performed the most delicate operations. These men were London's forgotten front line, fighting a lonely, silent war beneath the city's shattered streets. From the ranks of these extraordinarily brave men, legends began to emerge. One name, above all others, became synonymous with the quiet heroism of the bomb disposal squads: Sapper George Wylie. Wylie was not a figure of imposing stature or a battle-hardened officer. He was an ordinary sapper, a rank-and-file soldier who possessed an almost preternatural combination of calm, technical aptitude, and sheer nerve. While records of his early life are sparse, his actions during the Blitz etched his name into history. He became the most celebrated bomb disposal expert of the war, a man who seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the deadly mechanisms he faced. Colleagues described him as methodical and unflappable. In the terrifying confines of a bomb crater, with the weight of the city's safety on his shoulders, Wylie worked with a surgeon's precision. He developed a sixth sense for the hidden dangers, a feel for the subtle tensions and pressures within a fuse mechanism that signaled the presence of an anti-handling device. His work was relentless. As the Blitz raged, Wylie and his team would move from one UXB to the next, often with no rest in between. They would be called to a bomb threatening St. Paul's Cathedral, and as soon as it was made safe, they would be rushed across the city to another that had paralyzed the London Underground. His reputation grew with each successful defusing. The number is almost unbelievable. George Wylie is credited with personally defusing or supervising the disposal of up to 300 unexploded bombs. Each one of those instances was a life-or-death confrontation. Each success meant a hospital could keep operating, a factory could continue producing vital war materials, and thousands of civilians could sleep a little safer. Wylie's story is the epitome of the sapper's ethos. It was about applying technical skill under the most extreme pressure imaginable. He was a symbol of hope in a city gripped by fear, a living embodiment of British resilience. He demonstrated that the intricate, deadly technology of the Luftwaffe could be defeated not by overwhelming force, but by intelligence, patience, and a level of courage that bordered on the superhuman. To truly comprehend the courage of men like George Wylie, one must first understand the enemy they faced. It was not the bomb itself, but the small, intricate device screwed into its nose or tail: the fuse. German ordnance engineers had developed a terrifyingly diverse and complex array of fuses, creating a constant technological cat-and-mouse game with the British sappers. The most common was the Type 17, a clockwork time fuse. Upon impact, the shock would start a timer, which could be set for anywhere from a few minutes to over 80 hours. The sapper's first task was to listen with a stethoscope. The faint ticking was a good sign. It meant the clock was running and it likely wasn't booby-trapped. But silence was ominous. It could mean the clock had stopped, or it could mean it was an electrical fuse. Electrical fuses, like the Type 50, were far more dangerous. They were powered by a small battery that was activated on impact and could incorporate trembler switches, which would detonate the bomb if it was moved, or anti-withdrawal devices. Attempting to unscrew a live electrical fuse was often a fatal mistake. The sappers had to find a way to drain the electrical charge or freeze the mechanism before they could even think about touching it. The pinnacle of German ingenuity, however, was the booby trap. The ZUS-40 anti-handling device was a secondary fuse placed underneath the main one. It was a simple but devilish mechanism. When the main fuse was unscrewed, it released a spring-loaded striker that would detonate the bomb instantly. A sapper could successfully diagnose and disable the primary fuse, believe the danger had passed, and then be killed in the final act of removing it. The only defense was knowledge. Sappers had to learn to recognize the subtle signs of a ZUS-40, such as a main fuse that was slightly proud of its housing. They created a classification system for the various types of bombs and fuses, building a library of deadly knowledge from devices that had been successfully diffused. This intelligence was disseminated as quickly as possible, but the Germans were always innovating. New fuse types would appear without warning, meaning the first sapper to encounter one was, in effect, a test subject. His life depended on his ability to analyze the new puzzle, and his findings, if he survived, could save the lives of his comrades. This was a war of wits, fought in darkness and silence, where the price of a single miscalculation was obliteration. The scene repeats itself across London, night after grueling night. A call comes in. A large UXB has buried itself in the ground next to a critical piece of infrastructure, perhaps a telephone exchange or a hospital. Sapper George Wylie and his section arrive in their truck, the air still hazy with dust and smoke from the latest raid. The area is cordoned off, the silence of the evacuated streets amplifying the tension. The first task is to locate the bomb precisely. Probes are pushed into the soft earth of the crater until they meet the hard resistance of the metal casing. Then, the digging begins. Men work with shovels in the precarious, muddy pit, shoring up the sides with timber to prevent a collapse that could bury them alive or, worse, jolt the bomb. Once the top of the bomb is exposed, the moment of truth arrives. Wylie prepares to descend. He removes his bulky helmet and tunic, needing maximum flexibility and a sensitive touch. He is lowered on a rope into the cramped, dark space. The only light is from a battery-powered lamp, its beam cutting a small circle in the gloom. The smell is of damp clay, cordite, and fear. He lies next to the bomb, a cold steel cylinder that hums with latent power. His first action is to place a stethoscope against the casing. He listens. Is there a tick? A hum? The silence is absolute, which in many cases is the worst possible sign. It suggests an electrical fuse, possibly with an anti-handling device. With immense care, he begins to clear the dirt from around the fuse pocket. His fingers, sensitive from hundreds of similar operations, probe and scrape. He knows what he is looking for. The specific shape of the fuse head, the way it is seated, the presence of any locking rings. He identifies it as a complex electrical type, known to be fitted with the deadly ZUS-40 booby trap. Standard procedure is out of the question. Trying to unscrew this fuse would be suicide. He must resort to a new, still experimental technique. The plan is to drill a hole into the fuse itself and pour in a special chemical mixture to desensitize the mechanism. Every turn of the hand drill is a gamble. Too much pressure, too much heat from friction could complete the circuit. He works slowly, methodically, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Minutes stretch into what feels like an eternity. The world shrinks to the small metal object under his hands. Finally, the drill breaks through. He has done it. The bomb is not yet safe, but the immediate threat of the booby trap is neutralized. He can now begin the long, arduous process of removing the fuse and steaming out the main explosive charge. As he is hoisted out of the crater, exhausted but alive, he is met not with cheers, but with the quiet, respectful nods of his team. There is no time to celebrate. Another call has already come in. The primitive tools of the early Blitz soon gave way to remarkable feats of British wartime innovation. Faced with increasingly complex and deadly fuses, the Royal Engineers, in collaboration with scientists, developed a range of specialized equipment designed to give the sapper a fighting chance. One of the most important inventions was the steam sterilizer. For bombs that could not be defused on site, the entire casing would be transported to a safe location, often a large park nicknamed a bomb cemetery. There, a steam lance would be inserted into the bomb and hot steam would be injected, melting the TNT explosive filling so it could be safely drained out. This was a messy and hazardous process, but far safer than attempting to remove a stubborn, booby-trapped fuse. For the fuses themselves, a more aggressive solution was needed. This led to the creation of the BD discharger, one of the most iconic pieces of bomb disposal equipment. It was a device that looked like a small cannon, designed to be clamped onto the body of the bomb and aimed directly at the fuse. It fired a powerful jet of water or, in other versions, a hardened steel projectile, using a small propellant charge. The idea was to shear the fuse off or destroy it with such speed and force that its internal mechanism would not have time to react and trigger the detonator. Setting up the discharger was still incredibly risky. A sapper had to get into the crater, position the heavy device, and clamp it securely to the bomb. But the crucial advantage was that it could be fired remotely, from a safe distance, using a long lanyard. For the men of the bomb disposal squads, the moment of firing the discharger was one of maximum tension. They would take cover hundreds of feet away, pull the cord, and wait. A sharp crack would echo from the crater. If it was followed by silence, the fuse had been successfully extracted or destroyed. But there was always the chance that the impact would trigger the main charge, resulting in a catastrophic detonation. George Wylie and his contemporaries became masters of these new tools, learning their quirks and capabilities. They knew when to use steam, when to use the discharger, and when there was no substitute for a steady hand and a custom-made wrench. This fusion of raw courage and technical ingenuity was what allowed them to start winning the war against the UXB. For every hero like George Wylie who survived, there were many who did not. The story of the Royal Engineers bomb disposal units is also a story of immense sacrifice. The cemeteries of southern England contain the graves of hundreds of sappers, many of them incredibly young, who made the ultimate sacrifice in the silent war beneath London streets. Their headstones often bear the simple, poignant inscription of the Corps, "Ubeak," meaning everywhere. The psychological toll on the survivors was immense. These men lived with death as a constant companion. Every job carried a high probability of being their last. They worked in a state of extreme, sustained concentration, a mental effort that was profoundly exhausting. Sleep offered little respite, as the sirens would inevitably sound again. The bonds formed within the small disposal sections were incredibly intense. The teams, typically comprising an officer, an NCO, and a few sappers, relied on each other completely. They were a band of brothers, sharing a unique and terrible experience that no one outside their circle could possibly understand. The loss of a team member was devastating, yet they had no choice but to carry on, often heading out to the next job just hours after a fatal incident. One of the most tragic events occurred on September 8, 1940, in Warlingham, Surrey. A team of 6 brave Royal Engineers was working on a bomb that had fallen in a field. Something went wrong. The bomb detonated, killing all 6 instantly. Such incidents sent shockwaves through the bomb disposal community, a stark reminder of the razor-thin margin between success and failure. There were no medals for attempting a defusing. Glory was reserved for those who succeeded and lived to tell the tale. The men who died were often just recorded as casualties of the Blitz, their specific acts of heroism lost in the larger tragedy of the war. But their sacrifice was not in vain. Every sapper who died contributed to the collective knowledge base. Details of the incident would be painstakingly analyzed to understand what had caused the detonation, leading to revised procedures that would save the lives of others. The courage of these men was not just in facing the bomb, but in returning to the crater day after day, knowing the terrible risks, and carrying the memory of their fallen comrades with them. The work of Sapper George Wylie and the Royal Engineers bomb disposal squads was one of the most critical, yet least publicized, contributions to Britain's survival during the Blitz. Their victories were not measured in territory gained or enemies defeated in combat, but in the continued functioning of a city under siege. Each successful diffusion was a strategic victory. When a bomb was cleared from a railway line, it meant that food, troops, and munitions could continue to flow. When a UXB was removed from a factory, it ensured that the production of Spitfires, tanks, and bullets did not falter. By neutralizing the threat in docks and warehouses, they kept the vital Atlantic supply chain, Britain's lifeline, open. The cumulative effect of their work was immense. They were the invisible shield that protected London's resilience. Without them, the city's infrastructure would have quickly ground to a halt under the combined pressure of explosions and the paralysis caused by thousands of UXBs. The German strategy of crippling the city from within would have succeeded. Wylie's personal contribution of defusing up to 300 bombs is a staggering statistic. It is impossible to calculate the exact number of lives he saved, but it is certainly in the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. Each of those bombs, if it had detonated, could have collapsed a block of flats, destroyed an underground station filled with people sheltering, or started a fire that could have consumed an entire district. His work and that of his colleagues directly prevented mass casualty events on an almost daily basis. They were, in the truest sense, the saviors of London. Yet they worked in anonymity, their names unknown to the millions of people whose lives they were protecting. They sought no recognition beyond the quiet satisfaction of a job well done and the relief of surviving to see another day. Their heroism was not about charging into the guns, but about walking calmly towards a ticking clock, using skill and intellect to conquer fear and dismantle death. The final bombs of the Blitz fell in May 1941, but the work of the Sappers was far from over. For years after the war, they continued to find and neutralize the deadly remnants of the conflict. Even today, the legacy of the Blitz lies buried beneath the streets of modern London. Construction projects are regularly halted by the discovery of a rusted, but still potentially live, World War II bomb. When this happens, a new generation of bomb disposal experts is called in. These are the highly trained professionals of the British Army's 11th Explosive Ordnance Disposal and Search Regiment, the direct descendants of the wartime Royal Engineers. The equipment has changed dramatically. They now use remote-controlled robots, sophisticated imaging devices, and advanced cutting equipment. But the core principles of the job remain the same. A meticulous approach, a deep understanding of ordnance, and nerves of steel. The foundational knowledge upon which modern EOD techniques are built was written in the bomb craters of the Blitz. The hard-won lessons from every success and every tragedy were documented, forming the first manuals for this new science of bomb disposal. The pioneering work of men like George Wylie in analyzing fuses, developing remote procedures, and understanding booby traps created a blueprint for safely dealing with unexploded ordnance that is still relevant today. Their legacy extends beyond the military. The courage of the Sappers became a powerful symbol of the resilience of the human spirit. In a time of widespread, indiscriminate destruction, they represented a force of precise, life-saving skill. They proved that even the most terrifying weapons could be defeated by human ingenuity and bravery. The story of Sapper George Wylie and his comrades is more than just a tale of wartime heroism. It is a testament to the quiet professionals who walk towards danger, who use their knowledge to protect others, and whose courage ensures that the echoes of past conflicts do not continue to claim victims in the present. Thank you for joining WW Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.